Susan Glick, G-L-I-C-K. The date is June 26, 1995. I'm conducting an interview with Henry Levin, born Redlich, R-E-D-L-I-C-H, in Deerfield, Illinois, USA. Okay, I'm going to start out by having you state your name, your current name, and spell your last name.
My current name is Henry Levin, L-E-V-I-N.
Okay, and your name at birth, and if you can spell your last name.
At birth, my name was Herschel Redlich, R-E-D-L-I-C-H.
And spell Herschel?
Herschel, it's H-E-R-S-H-E-L.
Okay, and your birthday?
March 4th, 1928.
Okay, and your current age is?
67.
Okay, and the city and country of your birth?
I was born in Lodz, Poland.
Okay, and spell Lodz?
L-O-D-Z.
Okay, fine. Let's start out by having you tell me a little bit about the city where you were born and where you spent your childhood.
Well, the city was a big city. It was primarily a textile city. It had approximately a population of 1.5 million, of which about between 250 and 300,000 were Jewish people. It was the second largest city of Poland. Big, heavy industry. That's about all I remember.
You touched on this, but how extensive, tell me, was the Jewish community, and tell me a little bit about the Jewish community in Lodz.
Well, the Jewish community was a vibrant Jewish community, not exactly what you would call well-to-do Jewish community, but there were some. The percentage-wise, I would say, was maybe, 20 to 80. 20 well-to-do and 80% just mediocre, you know. After all, I don't remember too much. I was a little youngster, so.
Okay. Who comprised your household in Lodz? And who lived with you in the home?
Well, my mother, my father, and I had a younger brother, a younger sister, and a sister that was older than I am. There were 6 of us. Okay. We lived in a very small house. It wasn't a house, it was an apartment.
Just describe the house, describe the building.
The building was a big building. We lived in the penthouse on the 4th floor, and what I remember, there was a big opening in the roof which had a window. We had like a room and a half, and the 6 of us managed to live in the room and a half.
Just a room and a half. Did you sleep in the same room with all your siblings?
Oh, yes, we did. Sometimes we used to sleep 2 heads on one side and head on the other side in a big bed.
Okay. How would you describe, what did your father do for a living?
My father was, he used to work in a textile factory, making, well, not exactly, I can't describe the material they used to make, but they used to make like women's, wasn't cloth, but it was like a heavy woven material. And that's what they used to wear in Poland, you know, in those days anyway. They used to cover themselves completely, especially in cold weather. And that's what he used to make.
And how would you describe your family's sort of socioeconomic status?
The socioeconomics, I would say we were about the bottom 40%. On a scale 1 to 10, I would say we were 4. So my father had to work very hard in order to put bread on the table.
As a child, do you remember, you know, do you remember it as a time filled with hardship, you know, as far as having enough food and clothing, or was that
Well, we will never be able to buy anything that was new. We always used to go to the market and buy second-hand shoes, second-hand clothing, and this used to be only around Passover, for the holiday. That used to be the time when we used to go out and buy clothing for the kids. I remember that. And my dad, as I said, was a hard-working man. He used to work, 6 days a week and in order to survive.
Tell me a little bit about your family's Jewish life. How extensive was it?
Well, what I do remember is that my father, on any holiday, he used to drag me, make sure that I go to shul, whether I like it or not. My mom was in charge of my Jewish education, the little that I had, because I was a youngster, and they used to drag me to go to Heder, which is like a Jewish parochial school. Sometimes she would bring me into the window, to the door, and I would fly out through the window, but she'd make sure that I go back and get my little Jewish education that I did.
How would you describe your personality as a child? What kind of a kid were you?
I was rough, very rough individual, and it paid off, I think. It paid off when the war broke out, because I was the only one that was able to bring in the bread, sort of, because in line I wasn't recognized as a Jew, and I was able to stay in line and bring home bread. Where about my dad couldn't do it, my mother couldn't do it, and my older sister wouldn't do it, and my younger brother and sister were too young. So I was the only one that was capable, because of my roughness, I think, to make sure that I always bring some bread home. And at that time I was only about 11 years old.
How do you think you got that way when your siblings weren't like that?
I don't know, maybe because of the neighborhood I used to live in, I just happened to be a rough individual, I think, all through the life in the camps too, and I think maybe that paid off too, the reason I'm here.
What kind of a kid were you in terms of, what besides school, what did you do? Did you run around with other boys?
Oh, sure. I ran away with all the kids in the neighborhood, played soccer. Bicycle we couldn't afford. So that's about the only thing that I could do. Play in the neighborhood with the kids.
You also had somewhat of a singing career as a child?
Yes, I did. I used to sing in the shul when I was about, when I started grammar school. They found out that I did have a beautiful voice at that time, not anymore now, and I used to sing in the German shul, which was one of the largest synagogue one of the largest in Lodz. Beautiful, beautiful synagogue, and I used to get paid for it.
What was your relationship like as a child with other Jewish people, other people in the community? Did you mainly stick with Jewish people, or was there any connection with non-Jewish people? Did your parents have connection with non-Jews?
No, my parents didn't, but I did, because the janitor used to have some kids my age, and they weren't Jews, so I did have some connection with them. But primarily the building would consist of, I would say, between 99 and 100% Jewish. It was strictly a Jewish neighborhood, strictly Jewish environment, strictly brought up among the Jewish people.
Okay. What are your very first memories of anti-Semitism? Were there any incidents that happened?
From the day that I was born. The anti-Semitism was always available, because any time you had any kind of parade whatsoever, they would try and beat up on the Jews. Whether it was May 1st, May 2nd, May 3rd, that's my memory. They always used to beat up on the Jews. Sometimes the Jews didn't take it laying down. Sometimes they would set up traps because they know something like this was coming, and they would hit them back. But it was a known factor, especially around any kind of holiday. The Jews were always the scapegoat.
Did you ever have any personal experiences with this as a child?
I didn't, because I was too small. But most of the people did have experience. Always beaten up on the Jews, always.
Were there any pogroms in your community?
A lot of them.
In your community?
Oh, sure. We had, in one place, particularly that I remember, we went to in the summer camps, and they had a pogrom, but this time the Polacks paid for it. The Jews were sitting for them. They were waiting for them. And they were hiding like behind fences. And they started running and beating up the Jews. The Jews was running, but once they trapped them, they let them have it. They got them a taste of their own medicine.
Do you remember specifically where this was and when it was?
It was in a summer camp. And they knew that this is going to happen. And there was some grown-up man that could take care of himself, and they set like a trap. And as I said, they gave them a taste, a taste of their own medicine.
Do you remember the name of the camp?
No.
Or the year that this took
Oh,
place?
gosh. I was a little boy. I was a tiny boy. I don't remember. Dates, I have no memory whatsoever on dates.
Do you remember being, given these incidences of anti-Semitism, do you remember being afraid as a child of
Definitely. Always afraid. I was always afraid, and especially when, as I described, anytime they had any kind of parade, you made sure that you stay out of their way. Because after the parade, they used to say, Hurra na Żyda, which means, get the Jew, in Polish.
Do you remember your parents being very fearful?
Yes, they were fearful. That's why a lot of times when my mother would ask me to wear any, in Europe, the Jewish people would wear a special kind of small hats that would recognize you as a Jew. And I refused to wear it. My mom asked me to wear tzitzis. I refused to wear it because of that one reason. I used to play with some kids that were not Jewish, and they would make fun out of me and sometimes maybe beat the living daylight out of me, so I wouldn't wear it.
Did your parents ever put any restrictions on you because they were afraid for your safety in terms of a curfew or staying close to them?
Well, there was a curfew, my mom would make sure at a certain time all the kids were home, but there weren't specific hours like you would have set, like I did set for my kids here, tell them, okay, by 10 o'clock I want you all home.
Okay. Even though you were very young, do you have any memories of Hitler's sort of rise to power around the 1933 year?
None whatsoever. Because we didn't have the television, we didn't even have a radio. And where would I get the knowledge what was going on in a different country? We knew the war, when the war was out, that the war started, but that's about it. We had no knowledge whatsoever that Hitler was coming to power.
How did the beginning of the war begin to change your life through the 1930s? Before
Well, there was a shortage of a lot of things. And the war happened so fast that before you know, the Polish army was defeated. And it didn't take long when I remember seeing the German army marching through the main street of Lodz.
And when was that? Do you remember the
I remember it was in late part in 1939. And as a kid, I was a boy, I was welcoming it because, I didn't know exactly what was coming off. I knew that it was the German army, and I knew the Polish army was defeated, but as a young kid, you see all the armor and everything, I was sort of like, well, I can't describe, not exuberant, but just by the fact that I seen all that big heavy armor, I was standing in the corner watching them. But little did I know what was coming in a very short time. The neighborhood that we lived was a fairly decent neighborhood, and I didn't know, but the grocery that we used to buy, which I thought was Polish, turned out to be German. There was a lot of German population in Lodz, because the minute when the German army came in, which I was under the impression they were Polish, all of a sudden they were yelling "Hi Hitler," which I didn't know they were Germans.
At that point, did you understand what Heil Hitler meant? Did you understand the implications of that?
Well,
or did you have any idea what was beginning to go on in the rest of Europe?
No. I was too young to comprehend what was going on. But slowly I learned.
During this time, as things began to change, things began to heat up, politically and in Lodz itself, were you able to still have any kind of a normalcy to your life? You were approaching adolescence at this time. Did you still, play with your friends and go out?
Well, as I said, my main thing at the beginning of the war, when the German came in, there was a lot of restrictions, and there was little food available. And as I told you, my main objective was to try to get some food on the table for my parents, because they couldn't go out. My dad had a beard, and he was afraid to go out, even though he could have, I guess he could have shaved off the beard, but he didn't. And I was the only one that was out on the street early in the morning and managed to bring home bread.
And how exactly did you manage to do that?
Well, I would get up early, 2, 3 in the morning, and the fact they didn't recognize me as a Jew, I would stay in line in the bakery, and when the bakery opened up, I managed to get bread.
Okay. Talk a little bit about the ghettoization of Lodz when it formally sort of became a ghetto. What are your memories of that?
Well, my memory is the fact that they send out on every corner. I remember there was like a notice, because as I explained to you, we didn't have no radio or telephone. And the notice said that they give us only so many hours to pick up all of our belongings, which means whatever we could carry with us, and go to a designated area, which was the ghetto. And I moved to the ghetto with my whole family. And they did give us, we managed to get a little apartment, which was 1 room, but we were used to it, so we managed.
And this was when you made this move? Do you remember the month?
No, I told you, dates are bad with me.
It was 1940?
1940, yeah.
Do you remember the time of year? Was it cold, or do you remember?
No, it wasn't cold.
Okay.
It wasn't cold.
Okay. Expand a little bit on the conditions in the ghetto. What were some of your physical restrictions? To what extent could you come and go?
Well, the ghetto had boundaries, and you couldn't go out of the ghetto whatsoever. Once you went into the ghetto and the fence was put up, that was it. Even the main street, you couldn't cross the street. They built like a bridge, so the streetcar could go by, but we couldn't. We had to go over the bridge in order to meet the second portion of the ghetto, because it was divided by a main street. They want to make sure that they have a main thoroughfare through the ghetto, and the streetcar used to go by.
What was your daily life like in the ghetto?
Well, I got a job shortly. I used to work in a factory as a gopher or a runner, whatever you want to call it. And that used to be my job. I used to run from a different department and carry different stuff to them if they needed. And that was my job.
What kind of a factory was it?
Used to make textile. I presume it was for the German army.
And most of the children were forced into this work?
Yes, they had to do something.
Okay. Again, while you were in the ghetto, did you continue to have friends? Did you? I know your friend Simon.
Well, my friend
he...
Simon, I only met him in the last year in the concentration camp. That's when we got together. He came later in my life.
Okay. Were you able to maintain friendships while you were in the ghetto, or was it just merely a matter of survival? I mean,
well, friendship with you mean with people that I used to have friends that were not Jews?
No, well, mainly other Jews, or the people that you were friends with before. I'm trying to get a sense of how
No.
much your life changed when you were...
No, completely, because the neighborhoods weren't kept together. So in other words, if you knew somebody from the neighborhood, all of a sudden he disappeared. So whatever little friends I had, I lost them, and you had to make new friends.
What about your family situation while you were in the ghetto, in terms of their health and their physical, mental condition?
Well, food was very scarce, and there were rations. We got very little food. My dad got sick because the little food that was available was just not enough to sustain him. And it didn't take long, but, when he died of malnutrition.
And he died in?
He died, I would say, around 41. and because there just wasn't enough food. Maybe because I was a little smaller and, we managed with the food, and food was a very scarce commodity. So the little food that we got, my mother would make sure that every one member of the family has its share. Sometimes she would even give some of hers, to one of the kids if we were hungry.
What about the rest of your family?
Well, my sister worked. She had a job. She was older. My little brother didn't. And my little sister, naturally, she was very, very small. And she got sick. And I know they took her in the hospital, and she died in the hospital. That was it. I never seen, her, where she was buried or what. My dad, I did bury him. I remember where he was buried in the lodge.
What's your understanding of how your little sister died? Did they tell you?
I have no idea. No idea. All I know, she got sick, and we took her to the hospital, and that was it.
And how old was she?
Oh, gosh. She must have been about, let's see, she must have been, I don't know, 6 or 7 years old.
When you were in the ghetto, who was watching over you? Who were the soldiers, and what kind of treatment was there when you were in the ghetto of the
Well,
Jews?
inside the ghetto, we had like our own police department, and they also had a fellow which was Rumkowski Chaim. He was in charge of the whole ghetto. He was in charge, and if they needed X amount of Jews to go to a certain job outside the ghetto, they would ask him, and he would deliver. He would also deliver some Jewish people that he knows will probably end up in the gas chamber, but he had no choice. He had to do it.
This was like the Jewish Council?
Yes.
What was his name?
Rumkowski Chaim. I remember it very well.
Okay. Was the treatment very harsh when you were in the ghetto? Did you have any direct contact with the soldiers?
Police and stuff? No, I didn't, because as long as you behave yourself, you have no problem with the police.
You were only a child then, but do you think that people knew at this time? Were people being taken out of the ghetto and shipped to the camps throughout this period?
Yes, they were.
Were your parents, were your mother at this time aware of where they were going, what was happening?
No. In fact, we didn't know that Auschwitz existed. We didn't know. Most of the time, when they took you out of the ghetto, the only kind of rumors that we heard was that you went to some kind of work. Where the work was, where you were going, was never known to anybody. So they picked you up, and off you went. And we never had any kind of connections, because those people that left the ghetto never came back. So we never had the knowledge where they went.
Do you remember at what point in your experiences you realized what was happening? Was it until you got to Auschwitz, or at any point before that did you realize what was really going on?
No, I had no knowledge whatsoever. I didn't know. In fact, when I was on the train to go to Auschwitz, I didn't know where Auschwitz was. I didn't know anything about Auschwitz till the day I stepped off the train.
The period in which you were in the ghetto was around the time you might have been studying for your bar mitzvah, maybe a little bit before.
Right.
Were you aware of the fact that you were missing out on this
No.
part of your life?
No, because as I said, my main objective in life was trying to get a piece of bread, and that was it. No bar mitzvah, no nothing was on my mind. And I don't think anybody that was a bar mitzvah age became bar mitzvah. First of all, I had no schooling. I had very little. And then there was no place. And there was nobody that will actually teach you. And if they did, maybe they did it in secret, But I don't know if anybody, I never went to any bar mitzvah, never seen any bar mitzvahs till after the war.
What was your physical condition like while you were in the ghetto? Obviously, I was trying to survive and eat enough, and
I told you I was a little roughneck, and my physical condition was pretty good.
so you weren't weak. I mean,
No.
you had managed to get enough to eat.
I was always managed. I used to manage to break down homes and rip the lumber out and bring it home so we can have fire and stay warm. And if there was anything that I could do, I would do it. I was like a little daredevil.
It sounds like you had a real strong drive also to protect your family.
Well, protect my family as well as protect myself.
Okay. Okay, tell me about the time that you were that you left for Auschwitz. What were some of the circumstances surrounding
Well,
that move?
it was almost liquidation time, and the ghetto was being liquidated. And they told to get the families together and that we're going to ship out to our work camp. That's all we knew. And once we were thrown into the cattle cars and the doors were locked, we hardly had any water. Whatever bread we had was whatever we brought with us. And we didn't know anything about Auschwitz till the doors opened. And even then, I didn't know anything about Auschwitz. I found out about Auschwitz once I was in Auschwitz.
First of all, when was this, when you were rounded up at the ghetto and told that you were leaving?
Oh, about the last part of 1943.
And who was with you from your family?
Whoever survived, my mother, my sister, and my younger brother was with me when we arrived in Birkenau.
Were they on the train with you?
Yes, they were.
What do you remember about being on the train, about the feeling and the atmosphere?
Well, I remember it was horrible because they packed us in, not even like cattle, because cattle you give a little more room to breathe. And we almost had to rip open the floor to get a little air. And even though there was a little window, but we were packed so tight that there was hardly any room to breathe. That's what I remember. Till they opened up the door and told us to get out.
How long was the trip?
I really don't remember.
Was it hours, days?
It was
weeks?
hours. To me, it seems like it was forever.
Did everybody in your train cars survive the trip, or did anybody?
Well, some of them didn't.
What happened?
Well, either they were trampled to death, or they couldn't get enough air to breathe. I don't know. I don't know the condition why they died, but I know, once they opened up the trains, there were some dead ones in there.
Levin, and the date is 6/26/95. Okay, we were talking about the journey to Auschwitz, the train ride there, and you were telling me that some people didn't make it, and you remember
Right.
that from arriving.
Right.
Your family was with you, but were you able to take anything with you, or just the clothes on your back?
Just the clothes on our back. Because they told us, well, we're going, we won't need anything more than the clothes on the back. That's all we took.
And they told you that you were going to work. That's all
Right.
they told you.
Work camp.
The fact that you didn't know where you were going, is that because you were a child, or did everybody not know?
I don't think, percentage-wise, I don't think too many people knew where we were going, and if they did, I don't know, maybe they didn't want to tell us. But as far as I know, very few people knew that we were going to Auschwitz.
What do you remember about your mother at this time, about her reactions to everything that was happening? Did she seem, what do you remember about her?
Well, what I remember is like as any typical Jewish mother, would try to keep her family together because the responsibility was on her. My father was dead, and she lost one child, and she tried to keep the rest of them together as much as she could, but she had no control over anything. And once we arrived in Birkenau, and we disembarked, it's the last time that I seen her and my sister. Maybe I'm running a little bit too fast because you asked me what I remember about my mother. Anyway, in the ghetto, as I said again, she had very little control because there's very little she could do. The ration was you got so much, and that's it. I don't remember her doing very little cooking in the ghetto because she had very little food available to her, and there was no gas. We did have electricity, and the house, I remember, was very cold, and I used to, as I said, I used to go rip up whatever I could in order to bring it home and to make a little fire and trying to keep the house warm. I don't remember too much about my mother, except the fact that she used to be very strict with me and tried to get me a Jewish education, the little that I do have.
Tell me about your arrival in Birkenau. Tell me exactly what happened.
Well, in Birkenau, once we disembarked from the train, I remember there was a lot of noise, a lot of screaming, because they tried to rush it up. And I do remember that they separated my mother and my sister from me, but I did manage to stay with my brother, which was a couple years younger. And we ended up in Birkenau, in the barracks. And there we stayed, I don't remember how long. We got tattooed on our hands, giving us numbers. And after a few weeks, I got separated again from my brother. And I was sent to a working camp, which is Buda. And it used to be like a farm working camp, a lot of fisheries. And they also used, believe it or not, they used to raise horses for the German army.
But let's backtrack a little bit and talk
Okay.
a little bit more about your experience in Birkenau.
Okay.
When you were separated from your mother and sister and then later on from your brother, is that the
Yeah.
last time you saw any of them?
Right.
Did you ever learn of their fate, specifically what happened to them?
No. No. I know the fate wasn't good, but I never learned exactly what happened to them.
When you were separated from them, did you have any idea that that would be the last time you would see them?
No. No, the reason for it was because it's normal to separate the men from the women, which I understood that was just because of sexual reason that they separate the male from the female. But I didn't know what happened to him. I didn't know if, the fact that they separated them, that they went to the gas chamber. That I don't know. But I do know that, that after a while I found out that even then they separated the men again. The women with children, with little children, people that weren't physically capable of maybe doing any work in the German eyes or whatever. They went in a different section. I didn't know where they were going until once I got to Birkenau, I found out where they were going. That's when I found out everything. I found out about the gas chamber, the crematoriums that existed, and I found out that once they send you on the other side, you are gone.
How do you remember feeling when you found out about all of this?
How did I feel? Oh gosh. How does anybody feel that they know with one motion it's either death or life? You know, now that you relived the situation, you want to know why certain individuals, once they found out, they knew that this is the end of it, that they didn't revolt. What did they have to lose? They had nothing to lose anyway. But maybe because there was the unknown, they didn't know exactly where they were going. That's my only explanation that I can give. Maybe that's the reason they didn't revolt, but otherwise I can't understand why we didn't. Even though I was a youngster, but I knew better.
Did you have a feeling that you wanted to revolt?
Well, if I had an opportunity, certainly I would, but you have to understand, maybe it's a little hard. Once you're in Birkenau, you have no chance to revolt. You know, everything's surrounded by electrical barbed wire, and you have to be careful what you say, because if you say anything out of the line, we used to have what they call capos, which is like, well, not exactly a stool pigeon, but almost like stool pigeon. And you have to watch your words, and you have to watch your behavior, and you have to watch everything. So there wasn't too many things that you can say or do. And still, I was still a youngster, small little guy.
You were in Birkenau, Auschwitz for about 3 months.
Something
you
like
said.
this, just a few months, yeah.
What did you do there? What was your daily existence like?
Well, I can tell you, we used to get up about 4 in the morning, line up outside, take the count, and that was it. It was just like a waiting camp. Some of them did go to work, but most of them that I remember didn't go to work till I got segregated, and that's when I started working.
Did you think that you were going to survive Birkenau?
No, I never thought I was going to survive anything. But there's like a fight in, there's like a fight in you that you think, you know, that maybe you will survive. Maybe you will survive, and that's what gives you the fight for the other day, another day. Otherwise, you might just lay down and die. I do remember one incident that I had a piece of bread when I came into Birkenau, and I was so exhausted from the train ride that when I got up, the bread was gone.
What happened to your physical condition? And what were you eating? Were you sleeping when you were in Birkenau and Auschwitz?
Well, in Birkenau, we slept on on a concrete floor. We had no beds designed. Nothing was assigned to you. We had a little ration during the day, and that was it. Birkenau was strictly an extermination camp. It was not even animals would get the kind of treatment we got, you know. It's very hard for me to explain, you know, what the conditions were, because they were inhuman. Just lay on top of each other, you know, and you don't know if the guy next to you is alive or he's dead. Till you wake up in the morning, you know, he's moving, he's dead.
Did you witness a lot of atrocities at Birkenau? I mean, personally, or did it happen in another area of the camp?
Well, in Birkenau, atrocities, we didn't, you know, witness any extra atrocity, because the fact being there was an atrocity itself, and you are among your own people, so who's going to, except when the Germans used to come, you know, and they would take a count, and if you didn't stay lined up properly, you know, they whack you on the head for no reason. And they used to take counts every morning, just stay sometimes for hours, in cold weather, with no clothes, just stay there.
At some point, you were transferred to Buddha labor camp. Tell me about the circumstances surrounding
Well,
that.
they took me out of Birkenau and they put me into a working camp, which was a little bit of salvation for me, because at least I had my daily ration, and I did have a bunk where to sleep in. And we used to work primarily with horses, and we also worked with fisheries. They had a lot of fisheries. And when the weather used to turn cold, we used to take the fish out of one pond, switch them to another, and there was a function. Also, we used to have a lot of little horses. The little horses were taken away from the mother, and we used to feed them like it's almost like a cereal for the little horses. And I was managed to steal, you know, I ate some of it too. And it gave me a little strength. And then I have to tell you about one incident that in the fisheries, we used to steal some fish and bring it home to the camp. But the drawback is if they caught you, you get beaten up pretty good. We used to hide the fish. We used to have like a needle. You take the needle and you stick the fish in the back of the head, and 9 out of 10, the fish is dead. But what happens sometimes when you line up going back home, you line up to take the count, make sure nobody escaped. All of a sudden the pen started jumping because the fish came back alive. And they caught some of them. Besides getting beaten up, they made them eat the fish alive. That was the experience in Buddha.
What was the treatment like? You said it was a little bit better.
Yes.
Why do you think it was better?
Well, first of all, you weren't waiting like to be exterminated like Birkenau. Birkenau was like a waiting bomb. You didn't know the next day which direction you're going to go. So at least if they had use for you and they put you to work, your chances of survivals were a little bit better, providing you a good physical shape and you can do some work.
And how long did you remain in Buddha?
I remember, till liquidation time. In fact, there was one incident, was bitter cold, and they gave me rubber shoes with holes in them. And water used to go in there, and my knees puffed up, and I could hardly walk. And there was a French Jewish doctor. He knew if I can't walk, that's going to be the end of me. He managed to put together like a cardboard box with flashlights, put it on my knees, and the heat, for some reason, did help me. And I managed to walk a little bit, and it got me back on my feet. And that saved my life to a certain extent, too, because if you couldn't walk and they had no use for you, there was only one place for you.
Did you have more of a hope for your survival in Buddha because the conditions were a little bit better?
Well, yes, because as I said, as long as you work and they have use for you, your chances of survivals are a little bit better because they need you as labor, they need you for, you know, for the horses or for the fish, whatever it was. They had a lot of, the men were evidently tied up on the front line and they needed us. That was my explanation.
Okay. At some point you left Buddha, you were taken from there and you
Yes.
went to Mauthausen. Tell me
Yes.
about that.
Well, we were marching through Sudetenland and through Czechoslovakia, believe it or not, with the horses, with the wagons. And the conditions were bad as far as food is concerned, that the horses were eating the tail from another horses. They didn't have any food. But we did manage to get they had like portable kitchens, and they did manage to cook, you know, a meal for us. But then at one point they took the horses away from us, and evidently either they gave them back to the farms or the farmers, and then they put us on a train for a short little ride, and we arrived to Mauthausen.
Did they tell you at any point why you were being moved there?
They don't tell you nothing. No, we never knew where we were going or what our next move is.
How did you feel at that point? Were you Were you
Well, at
frightened?
this
Were you
point,
numb?
no, at this point I felt a little bit better because I felt that they were on the run. And whether they're going to finish us off before they get finished off, or they're just going to move us from one place to the other at a certain point where they have no place to run. And that's exactly what was coming to. They brought us into Mauthausen, and at one point they took us to another camp before Mauthausen, and that camp, I forgot exactly what camp it was. That camp would not accept us because they didn't have any room for us. Evidently, they were already crowded. So we ended up in Mauthausen.
How long was the journey from Buda labor camp to Mauthausen in Germany?
I would say only about a week.
And it was on foot and by train?
Most of it on foot. The last day I remember went by train.
What was Mauthausen like?
What was Mauthausen like? Well, it was one of the worst camps that I have seen, that I have been personally in. Birkenau was bad, but it was a dead camp. But this camp was real bad. They stuck us in, you know, and we had bunks 3 or 4 high, and we were just like herring, laying next to each other. And again, we didn't do any work. They didn't put us to work because the camp was in disarray, and there were more people coming every single day, every single day. So the conditions were very bad in Mauthausen. At one point, not to my knowledge, I didn't know, but they took us out of the camp, and we took us down to the river, which is the Danube, Donau, and they put us aboard. It was not a ship, but it was a like a tanker, huge tanker, with an open hole, and they stuck thousands in there. And the only way you could get any kind of water is they had one of the fellows, in fact my friend Shimek, would lower a bucket of water down to the people, and that's when they got water. After within about a couple days, they took us out. And at that point, Simon, my friend, and we escaped. But we escaped only for a short time. We had no place to go. We decided we went back to the camp. We're afraid of the Germans. We knew the end is coming close, and if the German catches us, I'll be dead for sure. So believe it or not, we went back. And they empty out the tanker, and they evidently had a lot of Russian invalids with no legs, no arms, and that saved us because they took out the Jewish people and they filled them up with Russian invalids, and then we heard that they sunk the whole ship. So evidently it saved our lives. And then we went back to the camp. The camp got so crowded that they took us out of the camp, out of the main camp, and they put us in tents, the surrounding area of Mauthausen, not in the proper, in the camp proper itself. And there were thousands of us, and the condition was so bad that food, when they brought in the food, whoever was strong enough to grab some food at the gate got it. And if you weren't strong enough, you didn't get it. That meant that some people had to live with no food whatsoever. And it was like I said, the strongest survived. And it was so bad that we had no latrines. The only latrines you had was like a big ditch and like a board, like a 2x4. And people that used to have to go to the bathroom. They were so weak, a lot of them fell in and drowned in the human waste. It got so bad that at one time they bombed the outside camp itself. For the reason for it was, I think, that the American bombed the camp and they figured they'll hit the outside perimeter, which was guarded by the Germans. They wanted to hit them, but in the meantime, they hit the people that used to stay in the tents, and thousands of them were killed by American bombs, believe it or not. When they get through, there were guts and flesh hanging on the electrical power lines. And that's when I witnessed the first time that people were eating people in order to survive. And in fact, we had a transport. They came in from Hungary, well-dressed, well-educated people. I don't know if they were lawyers or doctors or whatever, but I know that they were well-dressed, well-mannered people, and those are the people that did most of the cannibalism. Evidently, we were either weaned or we were used to it, but they weren't. And once they threw them into the condition, which I described, which were horrible, that's the first time I witnessed people eating other people.
Yeah, I want to make sure that I'm following you. The Hungarians that were, you said, were just new and coming
Hungarian Jews came in, yes.
They were the main people to do the acts of cannibalism, or to...
Yes.
Hmm?
They probably won't like me for making that statement. Some Hungarian Jews might not like it, but that's what it was.
How did you feel when you witnessed this? I mean, was it...
Well, I thought they were animals, you know. But as I said, in order to survive, if you didn't have nothing to eat, I witnessed people eating grass, even though the Germans were yelling at them, if you come closer, we're going to shoot you, because there was like a barbed wire between, and there's maybe 10, 12 feet between the actual barbed wire, and you couldn't cross it. The Germans were yelling at them not to, and it meant nothing. So they shot at them, so they shot at them. So evidently they felt if they died, they died. And some of them did die, and evidently death was better to get killed by a bullet than try and starve to death. There was a choice, either one. They took the easiest way out, to get hit by a bullet.
How did you manage to survive, and what was your physical condition like in Mauthausen?
Well, as I said, I was a little stronger. I knew a lot, you know, maybe the angles, and I knew where the bread was coming from, because I was used to it. And then I met my buddy, Schimmick, which he was by the gate. He always opened up the gate for the Germans to come in, and he was the first one to get bread. So if I didn't get any, he did. We always shared. So I always managed to have a piece of bread.
Would you describe yourself as starving still? I mean, were you emaciated? What did you look like?
Well, I didn't exactly, you know, I don't know, you can see some pictures that when I got out of the camp, I was a little fellow, and sure, I was skin and bones, but I was strong enough to manage to grab something to survive, where about a lot of them didn't.
What about your mental state at this time? You say Mauthausen was the worst of,
Yes.
of everything.
Yes.
Did you still have a will to survive?
Yes. Oh, definitely. I definitely had a will to survive, and I definitely said I'll do anything in my power in order to survive. The will was always there. I never gave up. I knew I didn't know if I was the only one that's going to come out alive, but at one point I said to myself, I'll do anything I can in order to survive. I don't know, maybe the mental attitude helped me, but...
Just for clarification, is Schimmick the same person as Simon?
Yes.
That's his...
Schimmick is like a Polish
name?
expression, yeah.
And this is somebody you befriended in Mauthausen?
Yes.
And the relationship still...
Yes. We decided that we're going to, since he had nobody, and I had nobody. We treated each other as like brother, and we got we looked out for each other till the end of the camp, and we looked out for each other after the camp too, when we survived.
There was another incident that you mentioned at Mauthausen involving a quarry. Could you
Yeah.
talk about that?
Yeah, there was Gusen. I didn't know exactly where it was located, but we knew that Mauthausen itself had a small crematorium, a very small crematorium, nothing in comparison to Auschwitz. And we know that there was a Gusen. It was like a death camp, even though I myself never went there, but there were some people that did go and did survive. And that's how we found out that there was a quarry. They used to give them big, heavy, huge stones, and they would make him walk steps, and they waited till he got on top, and they would take one of them and kick him, and if he would fall down, he would take down the whole row, and quite a few of them got killed that way. I don't know if this was their way of, instead of using the crematorium to get rid of a lot of people, but they managed. They killed a lot of people in Gusen. And now I didn't even know, but after the war, I found that there were quite a few Gusen. There wasn't just one, but there were quite a few of them.
Towards the end of your stay at Mauthausen, what was your sense of the Germans' sort of level of desperation? You sort of described them as becoming more desperate to complete their mission. Talk about that.
Well, you mean as far as what? I don't think you made yourself clear.
Just finishing what they were setting out to do. You say that the camps were overcrowded and the methods of extermination became more varied.
Okay, what happens evidently, as you can see, the Lodz ghetto, they had to eliminate it. The Warsaw ghetto, they eliminated it completely. Auschwitz, they eliminated. Treblinka, they eliminated. And it looks like they were just squeezed. And you can see that the way they were traveling towards Germany, because the Russian army evidently was closing in on them, and they were moving whatever they could to other camps, and then other camps became overcrowded, and they had to find ways of exterminating some of the people in order to make room for more coming in. And like I explained, they dump out a lot of Russian invalids with no legs and no hands, and which saved us. But this was their way of trying to eliminate as many as they could before this whole thing came to a conclusion. Because in the camp in Mauthausen, the minute there was any kind of air raid, we had to disappear, because we couldn't walk on any or wave anything at the pilots, whatever. And the air raids were more frequently. The artillery was getting closer, and we knew that the end is near. So we were fighting for survival, because at that point we knew that if we're going to make it, in the next day or so, we're going to make it towards the end of this situation.
Okay. And the date is 6/26/95. Just to backtrack for a moment, tell me about the experience in the Buda labor camp with your meeting of some Greek Jews.
Yeah, well, in Buda I met up the first time in my life that I ever came across Jewish people from Greece. They happened to be from Saloniki, and I was surprised the fact that they were very good in Hebrew, which I wasn't at all. And they did try to teach me Hebrew, a little bit of it. In fact, they taught me the Greek national anthem. And there were very, very good people, very, very tough individuals. And I met up with them after we got through with Buddha. I met up with them again in Mauthausen. I was really surprised. In fact, I didn't think there were Jews in Greece, but they had some Jewish people in Greece. Whenever I did manage to steal some fish, I would give it to them. They would cook it, and very nice. They were very nice individuals.
It sounds like they really made an impression on you.
Yes, they did make an impression on me. As we go on, I'll tell you later on why they made an impression on me. They were very rough. And after, when the war was just about over, they were very bitter, the Greek Jews, very bitter.
And so what happened?
I tell you what happened. They used to, whenever they used to catch, after the war, any Germans or the Kapos, which I told you, they were like stool pigeons, they took the eyes out with forks, cut the ears and nose off, which I wouldn't do it, and I know a lot of other people wouldn't do it, but they did it. They were very, very bitter, and they went for revenge.
Okay, we're moving ahead here, and we're going to talk a little bit about your liberation. Do you remember the exact day of the week, date of the liberation?
As I told you, I'm not good with date, but this date I do remember exactly. It was on a Friday, May 5th, when the Third Army of the United States came in and liberated us. By the way, it's the first time I ever seen a black person. I never seen any black people before. And especially when they were dressed with the jungle camouflage. I thought they were coming out of the jungle.
And this was May 5th, 1945.
Yes.
Tell me, where were you exactly? What happened when they came in?
We were in Mauthausen when we got liberated. And the first thing, believe me, I was starved. But the food all of a sudden became unimportant to me. My friend Simon and I, the first thing when the gate opened up, we decided we're just going to go walk. Just walk. Just walk. Just keep walking and walking. To make sure to fulfill your own soul, like the fact to believe in yourself that you are actually free. And that's the only thing we did. We just walked and walked and walked for miles. And then we came back to the camp again. And then...
Why did you go back?
Well, first of all, we had no provisions. We had no... nothing. No clothes, no nothing. We did come back to the camp. And the next couple of days, some people were very bad shape. I mean, even hospitals, there weren't enough hospitals, I think, for so many people. There were nothing but skeletons laying around all over. Also, Shimmick and I, we managed to get together a lot of diamonds and gold from dead bodies. And we sold some of it after the war. And then we decided, the two of us, that we'll just venture out and we see what is out there.
What do you remember about the liberators and about their reactions to what they were saying?
Well, when the camp got liberated, they lost control of the camps, and then all of a sudden they said they better do something because the killing was awesome.
The killing, who?
The killing of the German guards, whatever was remained, and the killing of the people on the inside, of the collaborators. I told you, they were taking eyes out with forks, cutting nose, ears off, whatever they could. And they cut other things that I won't even mention, you know. So the American Army decided they better do something in order to keep this thing under control. And the MP came in, and when they got through, there was nothing but dead bodies laying all over the main the main road, and they had to start acting civilized. So they did manage to put pressure on everybody to stop the killing and to act civilized.
So you and Simon left the camp, and then
Right.
you came back, and then what happened?
Then we decided that we're going to leave the camp because a lot of them were going out. There were certain, the American Army did take out some people that were capable of walking out of the camps, and they took them to near town, like Vienna wasn't too far away from. And we went to Vienna. We didn't stay in Vienna, and we kept on going. We ended up in Plattling.
When you say you went to Vienna, Austria?
Austria, yeah, because Mauthausen is in Austria. And from Vienna we went to Plattling. Plattling, which is a very small town.
In
There we found a bunch of Jewish people. There was maybe a dozen.
and Plattling is in what country?
That's in Bavaria.
Bavaria.
Yeah. Well, Vienna and Bavaria, they're very close together. It's only a few miles that separates one country from the other. And we went to Plattling, and we met a bunch of Jewish people, and they seen a couple orphans, you know, with no place to go and nothing to do. They decided to take us in.
Were they also survivors?
Yes, there were survivors from. I never even knew that you know, Plattling evidently had some kind of work camp, and they had some Jewish people working there, and they decided to take us in and close us. We found some German tailor, and he made clothes for us. He made it whether he liked it or not.
What do you mean by that?
What I mean by that, he better do it, or you know, we'll take it. We would, you know, take care of him. And as I told you, you know, when we got out of the camp, thank God we had a little strength, and the other ones had strength too. And once we got our strength together, revenge was on our mind. Now what do you do with it?
What did you
We
do with
got
it?
some assessment that that some American soldiers helped us to put them away.
I'm sorry, I didn't understand that. You did.
We caught some assessments, which
Some
were very
assessments.
brutal assessments, which were very brutal in the camp, and
Oh, SS men.
Yes.
SS men. Okay, I'm sorry. You caught
and-
them.
yes,
Mm-hmm.
and they made them dig their own grave and give them a taste of their own medicine.
That was you and Simon.
Me and Simon and the other guys. But it was primarily the American soldiers that helped us. They did it. Believe it or not.
How did you feel about that?
How did I feel about it?
Mm.
Well, I don't like to see anybody, you know, die, but you go away with a heavy heart with something like this, but there's still a certain satisfaction.
You alluded to some other things that happened after liberation as a result of your anger and
Well, naturally,
interactions
you know.
with the Germans. Can you talk about
Well,
some of the
we
other things?
we took off a nice, beautiful house. We kicked out the German woman out of the house, which happens to be a colonel in the Wehrmacht.
The,
took that-
the Wehrmacht is what?
Wehrmacht is like the army, not the Gestapo, but the Wehrmacht. We took the house over. She begged us to let her live in the attic, and we did allow it. So she lived in the attic, but for the fact that we allowed her to live in the attic, she had to clean and cook for us.
And this was in Plattling?
Yep. That was in Plattling after the war. We had to find some way to take revenge on them, somewhere to make them pay what they did for us. But what can you do? I mean, you get to a certain point in your life and you say to yourself, now what? So you killed a couple of them, now what? You have to start backing off and go back to normal life, as normal as it can be.
So you were in Platling for what, about a year, you said?
Close to a year. Yeah.
And during this time you did what?
Well, we did manage. We were buying cigarette and smuggle cigarette into Berlin in order to make, to make money. And we did manage to make good money. But was primarily set up with the older people. They made us to go first because we were younger. To get caught the chances were a little lighter because we were youngsters versus the grown-up people.
Did you ever make any effort at this time to determine definitively the fate of your family or go back to Lodz?
No, I would never go back to Poland. I said to myself at that time, there were already rumors that some Jewish people went back to Poland, and there was a pogrom already going on in Poland, in Celts. So we figured we made it through the camps and go back and take your fate and get killed. So we decided we don't want to see Poland anymore. And
what about seeing your family? Or
well, we knew the fate of our families. We knew the very slight chance that there's anybody alive. But once we got a little more established ourselves, then we started looking into camps and see if there's anybody alive. We went to a lot of big camps in Germany, and we used to travel from one to another and ask people and register with Red Cross or UNRWA or anything that was available to us and see if there's anybody alive from the family.
Did you ever find anybody?
Nothing, nobody.
What about your brother? You were never Yecheskel, you were never sure?
No, I'm still to this point. I was hoping, he was my only hope that he was alive. But once they separated us, I don't know what they did with the balance of the camp in Birkenau. No idea what happened to him.
Does part of you feel that he may still be alive?
My only hope is that he is alive. My sister and my mother, I don't have much. I didn't have much hope. My brother did have much hope, but we tried everything and no.
Have you done anything to determine your brother's fate, to find him?
No, my wife, thank God, she's been very active, and she always wrote to any kind of, we went to Yad Vashem in Israel, registered. We registered with every Red Cross agency available, and nothing.
Tell me about what happened. So after Platling, you came to Munich for a short time, and what happened in Munich?
Well, in Munich, I enrolled in a school, and I went to German school for a few months, and I tried to learn something, because in my schooling, don't forget, I had no schooling since the war started. There was no schooling for me. So we enrolled in a school for a short period of time, and then we decided to migrate to my friend Simon. It was a choice, either go to Israel, and that's primarily what was our goal, is to go to Israel. But he had a lot of uncles and aunts in Canada, and he registered himself, and as well he registered me too. But so we ended up from Munich. We went to a camp. It was like a point of embarkation, sort of point, and it was Prenam Kimsey. It was a beautiful part of Germany.
Can you spell that?
Prien, I think it's called Prine, and Kimsey is like it's like a sea. It's the name of a sea. It was in the mountain, not too far away where Hitler used to live. Beautiful resort town, beautiful, and that's where most of the kids stay. We stayed there till we got our visa, or well, we had no passport, but it was like a quota. And once your name was chosen, so since he went to the United States and he registered me, I went to the United States too.
He actually went to Canada, right?
Well, first he went to the United States, and then because it was sponsored by the USA Children's Bureau, and primarily for any orphans that didn't have any relatives could migrate to the United States.
And your intention was to go together, but
Right, but yeah, but I didn't know. See, we both registered together to go to the United States, but when they pick your names, they don't pick exactly for togetherness. They pick on the quota basis, and I think on the country of origin. If you're from Poland, they take so many, from Germany, so many of them, and he ended up a little bit ahead of me. He came to the United States about 4 weeks ahead. And he came to New York, but his uncles and aunts picked him up from Canada.
now how long did you spend at Prenam Kimsa?
Prenam Kimsa, I would say, just a few months.
What was it like there?
That wasn't bad at all. I mean, the food was decent. We got 3 meals. We got clothing from the United States. And we had a good roof over our head.
This was in Bavaria.
Yes,
And it was like an orphanage. It was like
Yes.
for children.
yes.
And then what happened when your number finally came up and you were allowed
Well,
to leave?
When my number came up, I ended up in Bremerhaven, which is a big port city of Germany. And they put me aboard ship, and away I went to the United States.
Okay. So here you were leaving, you were leaving the continent. I mean, how were you feeling at this point? You were...
Well, let me just backtrack a little bit. You can see that Germany, the troops that seen the atrocities that were committed in the camps, the United States was smart enough to pull them back because they seen what was going on and they want the Germans to pay for it. So there was they were like almost losing control, and they pulled them back. And they brought fresh troops in. And the fresh troops, they didn't see what was going on. So the Germans were getting their power back slowly. And we said to each other, too, we better get out of here because the Germans are getting too strong. And that's when we decided we're either going to go to Israel or just get out of Germany. And that's when we decided to go to the United States. And because of my friend, they end up in the United States, otherwise I would have probably ended up in Israel.
Mm-hmm. And were you always headed for Chicago?
No, I ended up in the Bronx, in an orphanage, with Catholic nuns that took care of us. And I was destined to go to Los Angeles, but in the last minute, somebody announced that they have relatives in Los Angeles, and since I didn't have any relatives in anywhere, they asked me would I mind, and asked me, but they took me off the train and they put the other kids on. So I ended up in the city of Chicago.
And the date that you arrived in the United States was when?
Was May 7th in 1947.
What do you remember about the boat ride over?
It was horrible. I was seasick.
How long did it last?
It lasted about a week.
Yeah.
I think, 5, 6 days.
Did you know anybody else on the boat?
No, not on the boat.
Were you scared? I mean, you're still.
Well,
pretty
I wasn't
young,
scared of anything. After that point, what I went through, I wasn't scared of anything. I mean, what can it be? Whatever I face has to be better than what I had previously. So there was no fear of me.
So what happened when you left the Bronx? You were in an orphanage there for a couple of weeks.
Yes.
And then you were left for Chicago.
Right.
What happened when you arrived in Chicago?
Well, I arrived in Chicago. I ended up in another orphanage,
Which one?
which was Max Nathan home.
Mm-hmm.
It's home on the west side of Chicago. And we were there for a short period of time, and most of the kids that came through the war got not exactly, they weren't exactly adopted, but they joined other families, and they lived with different families. Once I got to Max Nathan home, I met a lot of kids that were with me in Pre-Nam Kimsey. And I met a lot of my friends again, which was a surprise. All of a sudden, I come to Chicago, here they are.
And how long did you stay at the Max Nathan home?
Also just a few months.
And what did you do there? Did you go back to school?
Yes, I did.
Where did you
Yeah.
go to school?
Well, I went to school just for a short time because from Max Nathan home, I ended up with a family named Levin. And I lived with them, and I went to Van Steuben High School for a short period of time, and then I went to the YMCA High School in order to accelerate, because I was already, at that point, I was already, 17, 18 years old, and they had a lot of young kids starting up high school, and I managed to finish high school in 2 years.
What was your relationship like with the Levins?
Well, very good. They anyway, they gave me a roof over my head, and they gave me a home. Something that I didn't have for a long time.
What kind of a home was it?
Well, they had a son, which was he was a little bit incapacitated, a little crippled, and evidently they felt I was good company for him. And they gave me a roof over my head, they gave me a home, and they made sure I go to school.
Do you think of them as, and they're still alive?
Yes, they are. Yeah.
Where do they live?
They live in Florida, and I do see them.
Do you think of them as parents?
Well, to a certain point you can't, after all. They try to. They did try. But I can still remember my dad and my mom, right in front of my eyes all the time. All the time. I can, even though I don't have any pictures, but I do have a picture of them.
So this was, now we're getting into 1948, 1949, and you finished up school during these years.
Yes.
And then soon after that, I guess you met your wife, right?
Right.
How did you meet her?
Well, we went to a summer home on the outskirts of Chicago, and she happened to be there too. There's one incident I forgot to mention in Plattling that I told you about. We had our Jewish wedding, and Plattling also was heavy with fisheries, and we took fish to our wedding, and there were 3 of us traveling in a Mercedes-Benz convertible, and we delivered the fish. On the way home, since I was the youngest, I was sitting in the back. It was like a 3-seater, 2 in the front, and the one in the back was sitting sideways. They asked me at one point, would I mind switching seats with him? And because one guy got tired, I said, okay. So I did switch seats with him. We came to a cross, like a fork in the highway, and evidently he made the wrong turn. The car turned over, and 2 of them got killed. Their heads were cut off. I came out alive. The MP came, and they said they couldn't figure out how I came out of the car with nothing but busted collarbones. But as I told you, I said, God was my co-pilot, and I came out alive. Okay, now we're going to go back to how I met my wife. I met my wife in, it was Buffalo, Michigan.
New Buffalo?
New Buffalo, yeah. That's where I met my wife. She went to the same high school at Von Steuben, and even though I knew she was at Von Steuben, I went to another high school. But she lived in the neighborhood, and that's when I first met her.
So at this point, when you met her and you had been in Chicago for a couple of years, to what extent did you feel assimilated into the community of Chicago? Was it an easy transition for you?
No, it wasn't. First, it was very hard for me because I went to school with no language. I had language difficulty. I didn't understand the language, and it was very hard for me to go to school not knowing the language. But I managed to learn the language as fast as I could. It also helped me the fact that I was with a family that understood very little Yiddish, Polish they didn't understand at all, so I had to learn, and I learned it pretty quick.
What was it like to meet an American woman who you had not been through anything that you had been through? You obviously found enough in common, but was that ever a problem in the relationship that you ended up with somebody American?
No, it never created a problem for me. In fact, maybe to a certain point there was benefit. Even though my friend Simon Shimmick, he did manage to find a little girl from his hometown that went through the camps just the same way as we did, and they got married and they raised a family. And I wasn't exposed to too many girls from the camps, even though there were some survivors, very few. But there were no problems whatsoever. She understood my situation, and the language difficulty she understood too, because let's face it, even to this day I have an accent and it never helped me.
Did you work during this time?
I sure did. I used to work for Hillman's. Hillman's, it's a grocery store. Used to be on Devon and Western Avenue. I worked part-time, and I worked for Crown Office Supply, part-time, and I went to school. And then Uncle Sam came. And Uncle Sam says, "You want to live here in this country? We want you in the Army."
And this is after you got married?
Yes.
Do you recall the date of your marriage? The year?
December 30th, 1950.
1950. Okay, and then you and your wife lived where?
We lived with her mother.
In what neighborhood?
In around Devon and Western Avenue.
So you were married just for about a year before you were drafted.
Right.
Okay. And tell me about your experience.
Well, I got drafted into the Army, and my luck, I ended up in Korea. I took my basic training in Fort Leonard Wood, Missouri, and then my advanced basic training in Fort Bliss, Texas. And I ended up in Korea.
How did you feel about the fact that you were, so soon after having gone through the war, that you were drafted into the American Army and had to go fight again?
Horrible. The fact I used to say to God, you know, why me?
Let's end there, and I'll pick this up on the next tape, okay? It's 6/26/95 is the date. You were telling me about the fact that you weren't happy about the fact that you were drafted into the Army to fight in the Korean War. Talk about that a little bit more.
Well, I didn't mind so much the fact that you get drafted in the Army, but when I found out that I'm going to Korea, I did resent it, because I said to myself, here I'm the only one that survived the Holocaust, went through a war, finally managed to find a home and trying to live. Now they're sending me over Korea, and good chances are that I might find my fate in Korea and get killed. So I wasn't too happy. I wasn't a happy camper. But I had no choice. And I went through my basic training, and I ended up in Korea. I ended up on the front line.
Okay. How long did you actually fight on the front lines?
Well, we were on the front line about 11 months,
Okay.
on and off.
And at one point you actually had a very serious
Yes.
accident.
We was bitter cold. We tried to get, it was not related to the front line, but we tried to get the tanks going and we couldn't. We poured gasoline in the carburetors and it caught on fire, and my uniform caught on fire, and I suffered first, second, and third degree burn, and I required skin graft, and I ended up in the hospital.
And you encountered a doctor there that you
Yes.
remember.
Yeah, my good luck was good luck. I encountered a doctor, which nice young man, blonde, blue eyes, tall. I thought it was another German when he started questioning me about the fact that I have a tattoo on my hand and what was that from. And I hesitated. I didn't want to tell him because I thought he was German. And finally I told him, and he told me he's Jewish. He's a Jewish doctor. And he says that I need a skin graft on my hand. And since I've been in Korea on the front line 11 months, that the chances are, if they do skin graft me in Korea and send me back on the line, who knows? I might get killed. So he says, I'll recommend that you be transferred to Osaka, which is Japan, and let them do the skin grafts. And since I've been already 11 months on the front line, and the tour of duty is almost finished, good chances are that they might send you back home. And he happened to be correct. They did skin graft me. I ended up in the hospital for around 6 weeks. And they did send me home. But at that time, my commanding officer, which wasn't too smart of him, went ahead and sent all my belongings to my wife without any explanation. And I couldn't write my wife because my hands were completely taped up, which was a poor excuse because I found out that the Red Cross got a hold of me. Because once my wife got all my belongings, she got frightened and she started to inquire what happened to me. They found me in the hospital in Osaka, and the Red Cross questioned me why I didn't write to my wife. I told them I couldn't. And they said, well, that's no excuse. We'd be more than happy to write the letter for you. All you have to do is dictate you. Well, I had a big problem because my language wasn't exactly the best. So I was sort of like in the background. I didn't want to make big waves. So I didn't notify the Red Cross that I couldn't write. But anyway, she found me.
You encountered some other doctors during your experience in Korea that had an impact on you?
Well, not in Korea. The Korean doctors I had was just an American doctor that did my skin graft, and he happened to be a very, very knowledgeable doctor. He did a beautiful job on my hand. In fact, the only time it's noticeable is when cold weather sets in.
But at some point you encountered some doctors whose
There was something else.
parents
No,
Oh, I'm sorry.
no, that was with my wife.
Oh, that was later. Right. That was later on when
Yeah,
she was hurt.
later
I
on.
apologize.
Yeah.
Okay. So you eventually, from Japan, you came back home.
Yes.
And this was when now, just to get a time frame, that you arrived back in Chicago?
Yeah. Once I arrived in Chicago, I went to work.
Okay, and this was when? What year was this?
This was in 1951.
Okay.
And my time wasn't up yet in the Army, so they stuck me in Michigan, in the camp. First they stuck me on Lakeshore Drives with the anti-aircraft, which is before your time. And we managed the anti-aircraft missile for a few months till my discharge time came in, and then they released me.
At what point did you go to work for the Levins then?
Well, when I got out of the Army, I went to work for a cleaning plant for a short time, which her father owned. and he was very sick. He died. And then I worked for a diamond broker, and then the Levins asked me to come in to their business, which was a wholesale meat business. And I stayed with them for almost 15 years. At which point the business wasn't doing too good, and I decided, I have a lot of my friends which are in the scrap business, and I decided to go in the scrap business, and thank God for the scrap business.
It's been good to you, huh?
Oh yes, it's been very good to me.
And the business was where in the Chicago area?
It was Saxon Metal. I owned Saxon Metal. It was on the outskirts in Hammond, Indiana.
Okay. And you remained in this business for how long?
20 years.
Until?
Till I decided I had enough. I want to enjoy life a little bit. I accumulate enough, and I want to spend it. And I'm doing a good job of it.
Okay, so you retired when?
I retired 2 years ago.
And what did you do in your retirement?
Well, I'm trying to play golf
You live?
in Boca Raton, Florida. And
What is your life like there?
beautiful. Nothing wrong with it, you know. Get up in the morning and exercise. I walk every morning, and thank God the good Lord gave me good health. I'm going to try to keep it that way.
Okay. For clarification, when you lived in the Chicago area for most
Yes.
of these years, where
Yes.
did you live?
I lived in Skokie. I lived in Skokie for 36 years. I raised my family in Skokie.
And your family consists of?
I have a daughter named Paula. Then I have a daughter named Jan. I have a daughter named Marcy. I have 3 daughters and 10 grandchildren.
Okay. During your time in Chicago and even in Florida, have you been involved in any survivors groups?
Yes, I am. We went. In fact, my name is written in the. It's like in Miami. They have a place for all you survivors. Whoever survived, or whoever's looking for somebody, they put their name on it. I also go to meetings wherever there's a meeting. There was a big meeting in Miami, which I met up with some people that I haven't seen in years. I have registered my name. There was a Redlich, except there were 2 Redlichs that I looked up on a computer, but they weren't related to me whatsoever. But I don't give up. Before I close my eyes, who knows? Maybe I'll run into him. But
When you say him, you're referring to?
my brother, that's the only one that I think that chances are he might be alive somewhere, but I think it's going to be time I have to give up.
Have you ever been back to Poland?
Yes, I went 4 years ago. I went back. I want my wife to see where I was born, where I used to live, where I went to school, my home, and she was willing to go for 2 days. We went there for 2 days just to see it, and we got out of there as fast as we could. And that's about it. I'm going back again, and only because my kids, they feel they're entitled to see the house and where I used to live and where my grandparents used to be. So I promised them I'll take them, and thank God I can do it, so I'm going to do it.
And you're actually you're leaving 2 days from now, and
Yes.
And how do you feel about going
Well, I
back?
got mixed emotion for a lot of things. I don't like to travel with my whole family. I mean, it's everybody. And I'll be very happy camper when I know that they're back home. So I'm going, and I'll be very happy when they get back to their families.
Why was it important for you to make this tape?
Well, it wasn't so much to me. I truthfully didn't want to make the tape. I felt that it's a very bad episode in my life. I don't want to start reliving it or bringing it back or bringing back any of the horrible things that I went through in my life. But since I'm an introvert, I don't like to talk about it. my kids, especially my daughter Marcy, she does want to make this tape. She does want to have something that, if after I'm gone, she can always look back at it and show it to her kids that her daddy went through a horrible, horrible experience. Should be on record, should be on tape, that this thing did happen, and nobody can ever say that this thing never happened, because I'm a living proof of what did happen.
As you're making the tape and you're moving through this process, can you begin to see that, can you begin to understand, why she feels that way a little bit more?
Slowly, yes. I can see why she would feel that way. Even so, it's very hard for me to do it. I gave in, and I said, okay, I'll do it.
Although you never described yourself as a religious man, how would you describe your faith in God today, given your experiences?
Well, I'm sorry you asked that. It's a very, very painful situation. Is when you're in a camp, and I seen it, you see somebody, and according to our religion, I'm not that good versed on religion, but in our religion, even they say that a baby under 3 years of age cannot commit any sin. When you see somebody grab a little baby and hit him on a rock and watch their brain smashed, and then you say to yourself, if there's a God, which we all believe there is, why?
Have you come up with any answers?
No.
How do you think that your experiences in the Holocaust have affected the way that you raised your children?
Well, I'm trying to raise my kids, a Jewish way, and give them a Jewish background and Jewish education, because I feel they have to hold on to something. It's an old story, better to hold on with one finger than let go with all that. So, now you know how I feel if there's a God. Even though I go to temple and I pray, but there's always that doubt in my mind.
Do you ever dream about your experiences?
All the time. I'm always being chased. I'm always on the run.
How do you explain the fact that you survived not just the war, but so many of these episodes that you found yourself in, even
I told you
after
before,
the
God
war?
is my co-pilot. Now you ask me if I believe in God. Maybe it's just coincidence. But here I am, almost towards the end of my life. And thank God, I got a nice big family. It's funny, but my friend Shimek, he's got 10 grandchildren. But he's got 4 kids. So the 2 of us came back with big, big losses, and look what we did.
He's going with you to Poland.
Yeah, he's going with me. He says, I want to show Hitler that I have survived, and I have raised a family, and I want to bring him back and show him where we came from.
If you had one message that you could pass on to your children and your grandchildren, what would it be?
Don't let it ever happen again. Oh gosh, don't, maybe we were naive, maybe we were stupid. I think stupidity is more so than anything else. The fact to believe that the Messiah is going to come and is going to rescue us from the situation. And I think that was the biggest mistake of the Jewish people, waiting for the Messiah. You can see what happened. They paid for it dearly.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay, this is a picture almost about, I would say about 6, 7 months after liberation. As I mentioned to you, my dear friend Schimmick, we together, they made, the German tailor made us 2 identical suits. We looked almost like twins. I am on the left-hand side, and Schimmick is on the right-hand side. And with the French, they took us in and took care of us right after the war.
Okay.
This is another picture from Plattling. We met up with some other survivors, and I'm on the right-hand side, and Simon is right next to me.
And the year?
The year was 1945. This picture happened to be in a small town in Bavaria just before we migrated to the United States. That would be 1946. We were playing soccer with all the kids that happened to be survivors from the camps.
And
yeah, this happened to be in the mountains in Bavaria, and not too far away from Prien am Chiemsee, who used to be a camp where they used to get together kids, survivors, just before we migrated to the United States.
And where are you in the picture?
I'm on the bottom, on the left-hand side.
Okay.
This picture happened to be back from Plattling, and I'm right in the middle, all the way up on top. The house in the background that you see is the house that we evacuated the German people from, and we used to live in it. This also happened to be in 1945, 46. This picture is also in Plattling, and you can see there's a farmhouse in the background, and that's a couple women, also survivors from the camp, that I became friendly with. This happened to be in 1946, I would say, beginning of 46. Yeah, this picture is also in Plattling, and I remember it's somebody's birthday, and I happened to be in the middle right next to the flowers, and my dear friend Simon looks half asleep, is all the way on the left-hand side. This happened to be 1946. This picture is also from Plattling. Those are the people that took me under their supervision because they were a little older, and you can see the 2 youngsters are Simon sitting on top of the car, and I'm right next to the car on the other side. This happened to be in 1946. This is 1982. It's the wedding of my youngest daughter, Marcy, and this picture is all survivors except the girls, which we married to. It's my wife is the second from the left-hand side, and I'm right next to it, just above. It's 1982. This picture represents my wife and myself. It's 1989, New Year's Eve. Okay. This happened to be a picture at the bar mitzvah, which shows on top Jan, her husband Chuck, the son Russ, and that's me. Then next to me is my wife, then my grandson Aaron, Debbie, Mikey, my daughter Paula and her husband Chuck, then one of the in-laws, then you got my daughter all the way to the right-hand side is my daughter Marcy and her husband. Then we have Kayla, and then we have, on the bottom we have Sharon, and let's see, Dina. Then over to the right-hand side we have Mikey and George, Gary, and then we have Haley. And that represents the whole family.
You forgot anyhow.
I said that on. This is the number that represents Auschwitz that they gave me when I first arrived in Birkenau. The number is B7657. On my right is my wife, Diane, of 45 years. And on my left is my daughter, Marcy, which is responsible for this whole affair because I was unwilling to do it. So because of her, I'm doing it.
Okay. Start with you, Diane. Why was it important to you that your husband make this tape?
I think he suffered enough in his lifetime, and I think for the people who don't believe it happened, it's time that somebody let them know it really did happen, and they're lucky it didn't happen to them.
Is there any message that you would like to leave specifically for your grandchildren about the Holocaust, your husband's experiences?
I think they have to continue the memories of everything that happened, because it'll be up to them to perpetuate the memories of their grandfather and their great-grandparents and all those that were left behind in the streets of Poland. Hopefully it'll never happen again.
Is there anything else you'd like to add?
We're quite proud of Henry. He's come a long way from a little boy who had absolutely nothing at the end of the war and had no identity. And I think he's become a successful man in his life, and he's been a wonderful partner and a great dad. And I think it's time he got a little recognition too. Job well done.
Okay. Mercy, the instigator of this whole thing. Why was it so very important for you that your father make this tape?
I don't know if I can hold it together to continue to tell you at all. My father talked very little about his life. We know very little about his family. It's, I can't help it, Dad. It's missing pieces in our lives that needed to be filled in. And I felt he's an important part of history. That with his generation, once they're gone, there is no one else to tell the story properly, especially if he is so unwilling to share it because of how emotional he gets. And I really felt it was important that somewhere this information get down so that when they are gone, this information is there for everyone else so that they know what happened and that it did happen and that it is proper, that the story is properly told, because even my stories are only filled with my recollections of the maybe 3 times in my life that he has shared anything. And they are not correct either because they're old memories. So I felt it was important to get the correct memories on tape for other people.
How are you feeling right now that he's done it? Pretty much on your wishes, I understand, and must be a pretty incredible feeling for you.
Oh, you're going to ask the question that I'll explode from. I'm thrilled that he did it. We've been pressuring him for years. I tried to get him to write his life story to tell me, and it was very difficult for him. His nightmares came back and he couldn't do it. And we were talking to him the minute this program came into being. We started pressuring him into doing it, and he wouldn't do it. And I'm absolutely thrilled that he finally went and did it. I guess the magic words that I finally pressured you into by making him do it worked. And I'm thrilled. I can't wait to see the tape because there's so much of his life I don't know.
What is the most important message as a mom now yourself to be passed on to your children and to the other nieces and nephews about all this?
Gosh, well, I think that we are all a very important part of history, including myself and all of them. That this terrible thing that happened to my father makes all of us part of it also. And I want my children to realize how important their Jewish identity is to them. And how important these programs are, that it always be remembered what all these people have gone through. And I want them to appreciate the family that they've never met, that's not here for them. That's it.
Would you like to make a final comment?
No, what can I say? I'm very proud of her, the fact that she does want to perpetuate the situation, that to make sure it's on record that this thing did happen, and to make sure that my grandchildren do remember that something like this happened and never to forget it.
I think when Steven Spielberg made the movie Schindler's List, I think it opened a lot of eyes and a lot of hearts, and it brought a lot of questions that needed answering. And I think that this program that became obviously developed afterwards, I think it's the most wonderful thing that could have happened. I'm just sorry it took 50 years.
I'm thrilled. If it weren't for the program, I probably wouldn't get the information that we are about to get in Poland.
Anyone else have a final comment?
No.
We're just glad that we survived it and that he survived it, and we have beautiful
I'm
family.
glad I'm here.
We've got 10 great-grandchildren, and we came out on top at the end,
In spite.
in spite of it all.